Well, who could have seen this coming? Um, just about everyone who is an expert in trade or listened to those experts in trade when it came to discussing the topic of trade. We've covered this topic numerous times on this channel, and nothing has pretty much changed in these statements and in these areas when it comes to talking about trade. We are still in the exact same position of the Brexiteers promising this wonderful fantasy and all these wonderful things that we'll apparently get from trade, and apparently what Brexit was about. But then other people tell me that's not what Brexit was about. But Brexit was apparently about anything you wanted to be, apparently. I think that's been very, very clearly well established at this point. And of course, this morning, there is another study come out by the Institute for Government who has warned that once again, these magnificent trade deals we're going to get aren't going to be any way magnificent in any way, shape, or form. So, this comes from The Independent, and it's Boris Johnson's promise of lucrative trade deals are in trouble, study warns. Boris Johnson's promise of lucrative post-Brexit trade deals as the UK takes back control of its rules is on course to fail, a study has warned today. 3 years have been wasted failing to agree what Britain wants from its negotiations, the Institute of Government finds, and the handing of the advantage to countries on the other side of the table. It means that the controversy of the US demand to sell its chlorinated chicken, which has stalled the deal with Washington, will be repeated, its report concludes. The think tank criticises the unforced error of launching into complex trade talks before ministers have even decided what they want their post-Brexit relations to actually be. 3 years ago, we warned that the government had not set up the necessary structures of effective decision-making on key trade policy issues, said Maddie Thornton and Jack Thornton, a senior researcher. The government did not heed the warning then, but it needs to move urgently to put them in place. Otherwise, it will find itself losing control of trade and regulatory policy to better prepared partners. The criticism comes as talks with the EU remain in deadlock because the government cannot agree its future state aid rules and needs to satisfy Brussels' fears of undercutting. Hopes of a deal with the US this year have even been abandoned, and even a revamped deal with Japan has run into trouble in a row over access of UK agricultural products. Notoriously, Brexit-backing Conservatives claimed it would be easy to strike numerous lucrative deals with other countries once the UK was free to negotiate alone. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, Mr. Johnson said before the 2016 referendum. I think there is a huge opportunity to do free trade deals and believe in ourselves. In fact, a deal with the US, even if it can be struck, would only add 0.2% to GDP in the long run, the Treasury has estimated. And the continuation deal with Tokyo will only add 0.07%. The IFG study and the trade and regulation after Brexit says that it will be impossible to marry the desire for a clutch of new agreements and for regulatory autonomy because a weakened UK will be told to change its standards in return. It warns the ministers in the UK could easily fall victim to other nations threatening to collapse the talks if they don't get what they want. Sound familiar? This will be so funny if next year we try to do a deal with the US and then the US basically turns around and just goes, well, give us what we want or else the talks will just end today. That will be so funny because that's exactly what the Brexiteers have been threatening to do to Europe. But, these other countries will just do it. Anyway, it continues. Will be vulnerable to challenge at the World Trade Organization if its current dysfunctional dispute system becomes operational again. Has failed to agree its stance on key regulatory issues which risk it being pushed into making concessions it shouldn't. And it risks damaging the Union unless it can reach an agreement with the other UK nations which are responsible for implementing trade deals and could choose not to. So, there you have it. Here we are again. We get more warnings from more trade experts saying the exact same thing I have been saying on this channel for over, 4 years now at this point. Again and again and again and again. Just to this key, because the Brexiteers last week were screaming and were saying, oh my God, we're going to deal with Japan, how wonderful it is. Right there, 0.07%. At what point is that even a valuable trade deal? A lucrative trade deal, Boris Johnson said that we would be striking. It's sooner or later, the Brexit chickens will come home to roost, and it's not long now. We've already said it many, many times before. Brexit and the Brexiteers are in a constant battle with reality. They have this thing about British exceptionalism, which somehow means that Britain should be treated differently and somehow better than other countries. It has fantasies about trying to build some sort of post-neo-colonial British empire with like Canada, Australia, New Zealand. These are just complete fantasies, and it has been these fantasy scenarios fed to people, and not only just around trade, but in regard to immigration and other things that they've been fed for years, and it helps nothing. And what's the funny thing I've often said about this to people is, you look at these areas that voted in the north for Brexit. Most of these towns relied on EU funding to get by, because Tory austerity was bringing them close to almost bankruptcy. This is why I've said another thing that potentially is going to happen next year. You're going to see local councils and local authorities announce they've gone bankrupt. Because the Tory plan of just give these councils, say you've got to save this much money this year, and then suddenly go, okay, well, you managed to save that much money, well, now you've got to save this much money this year. And as we've said it before, a local council in my area said it before, things just disappear. And you look at it now, the situation, it hasn't, I've always repeat this, because it is true, and it is about to be proven true in more ways than one. The problems of this country were not caused by the EU. They were caused by an austerity-pushing conservative government. And you now have an even more hard right-wing government, the government that did that. So this whole thing about, there's not going to be austerity. Think again. Think again massively. And it's only going to take, I'd say, just a couple more councils to go bankrupt. And you could see huge outcries. Because all these councils have just gone, yeah, the government's not giving us enough money to run our public services properly. And they've been saying that for over a decade. And it's not And bear in mind, the first council to actually go bankrupt, this was a couple of years ago, I can't remember which one it was, but it was a Conservative council. It was a Conservative run council. All the councillors were Conservatives. They went bankrupt because they went hard on austerity themselves. And they ended up going bankrupt. But expect to see lots more of this type of stuff happening to councils soon. But there you go. That's basically what's going to happen. But unfortunately, that's the case. But there you go.